Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. It's really nice to see you all again. Tonight we have roughly 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1,400 likes on this one. I think if everyone dropped a like, we could definitely do it. Of course though, only if you feel this video is deserving of one. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. I post content just like this all of the time. But yeah, like I said, I hope you're all doing well. I recently had my 27th birthday. It's kind of wild. I started this channel when I was 19. That's 8 years. And I still very much enjoy telling horror stories, and I'm really grateful that so many people still enjoy hearing me read horror stories. But yeah, just a quick announcement. I'm gonna be trying to get back to my old upload schedule for the past 2 years, I want to say. I've always tried to upload one video every 5 days. I'm going to do my best to get back onto that schedule. It's always been the schedule that I feel like works the best. It gives everybody enough time to check out the most recent video, and gives me enough time to put together the next one, so I don't know if I'm going to hold true to it. I figured maybe if I mentioned it in the intro, I would feel a little bit more motivated to do it. I'm sure most of you are aware of what's been going on, but I very much want to start posting as much as I used to because, I don't know, this channel's always been a little bit of an escape for me. It's always been something I really enjoy doing, and I need to start spending more of my time doing stuff that I enjoy. Yeah, anyway. Sit back, relax, grab a coffee, and let's get into the stories. Enjoy, tell someone you love them, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. For as long as I can remember, people called me the pregnant boy. I was a tall, gangly kid with a protruding belly that extended far past my belt line. In kindergarten, kids poked my belly and giggled. Then in grade school and high school, even teachers asked, "When's the baby due?" Sometimes I joked back, made up a due date, or said I planned to name the baby Roger. Everyone laughed, but kids at school were vicious. These experiences bugged me more as I got older, especially as my stomach continued growing. I felt like the pregnant woman in that Alien movie, yet doctors insisted I didn't have a tumor. Some people just carry their weight in their belly, said my doctor, despite my lack of belly fat. Still, my appearance made dating difficult. "Sorry," said one woman, laughing when I asked her out. "I don't date pregnant guys. Too much baggage." I hung my head in shame, quit my job, and even contemplated offing myself. Meanwhile, my belly kept growing. The rest of my body remained thin, but my belly ballooned like an unstoppable force that I could neither contain nor extinguish. Then one day, I found answers after a medical emergency landed me on the operating table. Hours before, I was eating a Hot Pocket when something ripped. At first, it sounded like a zipper busting on a pair of too tight pants, but that wasn't the problem. Instead, blood seeped through my white Hanes t-shirt, oozing from my stomach like a crimson river. I called 911 and was rushed to the ER for emergency surgery. When I awoke from surgery, doctors huddled around me wide-eyed. "What happened?" I asked, groggy. "Robert, we removed the fetus," one doctor said. I shot up in my bed. "The what?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, Robert, you had a fetus lodged inside you. He'd been there all your life. Would you like to see him?" He reached for the glass jar behind him. "Good God," I said, panicking. "Don't worry," the doctor said. "You weren't pregnant. You had a rare medical condition called fetus in fetu. It only occurs in 1 out of 500,000 pregnancies. It happens during twin pregnancies when one fetus gets trapped inside the other. Usually, both fetuses die, but you survived. And your brother lived as a parasite inside you. Another doctor chimed in. Yes, your brother was growing quite large. But I thought I would faint when the doctor showed me the contents he'd collected from my abdomen. My eyes bulged as I stared at the grotesque creature floating in the jar. A giant man-child, beard and all, floated inside the container. He had an adult's head with a full mane, a bulbous nose, and talon-like nails extending from all 10 fingers and toes. He even had adult feet. As gnarly as the creature was, I followed the doctor's advice and took him home. I even named him Roger. At first, I didn't know what to do with him, so I placed him on my nightstand. The doctors told me to feed Roger like I would a goldfish, so twice daily I sprinkled crushed nutrients into his glass jar, and observed his eating habits. The first 2 days were uneventful, and Roger didn't touch his food. Then, just as I was about to give up, Roger opened his eyes. I pressed my face against the jar, eyeing my twin like a ghoulish science experiment. I poked and tapped at the jar, studying Roger and taking notes. One day, Roger pushed to the surface and gobbled the food. Then he turned to me and smiled. He even had a full set of teeth. I gasped, then jumped back. Ah, shit, I thought. What now? I wasn't expecting him to interact with me, yet here he was exceeding my expectations. So I kept feeding Roger until he almost outgrew the glass jar. Then I returned to the hospital for advice. It looks like Roger is ready for phase 2, said the medical team. Phase 2? I asked, confused. One doctor nodded. Yes, it's time to remove Roger from the jar to see if he survives outside the fluid. So the doctors removed Roger from the jar and placed him on breathing tubes, doubting he would survive. But you might want to prepare for the worst, said another doctor. He might not survive the transition. But when the doctors removed Roger from the jar and administered breathing tubes, they were amazed. Roger had not just survived, but thrived, even breathing on his own. Well, another doctor said, smiling, it looks like you can take Roger home. You'll have to be patient, though, because he'll need to learn to talk. But other than that, it looks like you've got a new twin brother. After taking him home, I marveled at Roger's progress. He was a rapid learner, catching on to English without difficulty, and speaking in complete sentences before long. I even arranged to get Roger a haircut and a manicure to trim his talon-like nails. And Roger had a quirky sense of humor. He made jokes, flirted with women, and was more popular than I was. I even felt a little jealous. But one thing concerned me about Roger. He played mean tricks on people and didn't feel guilty about it. Once he tripped a woman at the pharmacy and laughed when she fell face first to the ground, then spit out her 2 front teeth. Watch where you're going, he said, stepping over her and strolling off without a second thought. Roger? I said, you can't trip people like that. Roger shrugged, nonchalant. Why not? Because it's wrong. But Roger looked unfazed. I hoped his behavior would improve, and I tried to stay patient, but events escalated, suggesting I needed to rethink my plans. As Roger grew more independent, I decided we needed to part ways. Roger, it's time for you to get your own apartment, I said one day. He shot me a sour look. You mean pay for my own place? Why would I want to do that? I sighed. Roger, no one wants to do these things, but it's what responsible adults do. Who says I want to be a responsible adult? My posture stiffened, annoyed. Roger, this isn't a request. I'm telling you, it's time to get your own place. But Roger didn't get his own place. Instead, things took a darker turn. Over time, Roger stayed out later, often returning at dawn. "Where'd you go all night?" I asked, feeling like a suspicious spouse. "Out," Roger said, refusing to elaborate. I figured he had a new girlfriend and hoped whoever she was would ask him to move in with her soon, but Roger said nothing more. Later, after midnight that night, I awoke to a loud crash from the living room. Alarmed, I grabbed my baseball bat and prepared my cell phone to call 911. Then I tiptoed into the living room toward the sound, but I dropped my phone and gasped when I rounded the living room corner. Roger stood in the doorway holding an overfilled trash bag as dark fluid dripped onto the carpet. My hand flew to my mouth. "Roger, what's in the bag?" He glanced at the bag and shrugged. "Oh, this? Nothing. Just doing some house cleaning." "What's in there?" Roger's eyes darkened and his body stiffened, sending chills through me, and something told me to stop talking. I pretended to believe him, then returned to my bedroom panicking, desperate for an escape plan. What was I supposed to do? If I reported Roger, the police would do nothing without evidence of a crime, and at that point, Roger had already disposed of the bags, so there wasn't evidence of anything. There were some dark stains on the carpet, but the police wouldn't have bothered with those. Besides, calling the cops would have worsened Roger's wrath. But what the hell was in the bag? I wondered. That night, I decided I didn't want to know, and I returned to sleep telling myself I was overthinking everything. But these incidents continued. Roger would return home late, sometimes carrying stuffed trash bags, or I would find dark stains on the couch and carpet the next day. Sometimes I found random wallets and car keys hidden in desk drawers, but I learned to play dumb. Still, I felt like a fearful partner walking on eggshells to appease a volatile spouse. Then one day, I couldn't pretend anymore. It was time to confront Roger whether he liked it or not. One morning I was making waffles when a musty odor wafted from the basement. It smelled like old seafood or rotting meat. What the hell is that? I wondered. Roger wasn't home, so it was my chance to investigate. I usually avoided the basement because that's where Roger slept, but this time, I turned the basement doorknob and tiptoed downstairs. "Roger?" I called, making sure he wasn't home. Silence. "Roger?" I called again as I reached the bottom step. Nothing. But the putrid stench intensified, forcing me to breathe from my mouth. The basement was piled ceiling high with junk. Sweat socks, dirty sheets, food crusted to dinner plates, but nothing looked amiss. But that stench. What was that? I inched toward the kitchen, then, as if by instinct, I hesitated before opening the refrigerator, as though my body knew something my brain didn't. I took a deep breath, paused, then flung open the door, but I wasn't prepared for what awaited. On the middle shelf stood 6 severed heads staring back at me. All were 20-something men with beards, their eyes bulging in horror behind wire-rimmed glasses. Chunks rose in my throat and I projectile vomited into the sink, unable to control the direction or intensity of the vomit. Then, with trembling hands, I dialed 911, shaking as I reported the incident. The police arrived minutes later and removed the severed heads from the refrigerator. But they never found anything, not even after their nationwide search. and Roger never came home after that. Or at least, he hasn't yet. I am an avid hiker and happen to live near a national park that I think it's best not to name. Me and my friends go hiking there often, or I guess, did. If you have ever been to a national park, you might have noticed certain areas were restricted for one reason or another. This one was no different, and the reason we were given was that the terrain was too dangerous. To me and my friends, this only made it sound more fun. When you spend as much time in a park as I, you begin to catch on to the rangers' routines. Soon you are able to avoid them with ease, and so we made our way into the restricted area. We were soon met with disappointment as the terrain was quite flat and boring. It may have been safer there than other parts of the park. My friends and I started speculating why they might want to keep people out of here, and then we started getting shot out. We started running. I made the mistake of looking back. I didn't see the shooter, and I didn't see the hole in front of me either. After falling a good 10 feet, I began examining my legs to see if I had broken them. My eye caught something. Behind some rocks was an old and deteriorating satchel. Contained within it was some shotgun shells and what appeared to be a journal. Soon my friends came back and helped me out of the hole. We all escaped without taking any shots. One of my friends proposed the idea that they were simply trying to scare us away and may have only been using blanks, but that didn't make any sense. What could they be trying to hide, and why would they keep it in such a public area? Now I think I know the answer. Once home, I began looking through the journal and found that many of the pages, although frail, were still intact. The name Ellie Johnson is written on the front. The remaining pages read as follows. October 6th, 1915. The trees are all beautiful this time of year. It's a shame the leaves don't last long. I'd rather they look this way all year. I used some of the leaves to make beds for the sheep. I thought they could use them as it's getting colder. Dad says it will be even colder this year because our new land is up higher than the old. At first that didn't make much sense to me, but now I can feel he's right. October 8th, 1915. I've noticed my chores get done a fair bit faster now that there ain't as much more than a cow and some sheep to feed. But this has left me with nothing much to do. My friends are all miles away now, and there ain't nobody out here but us. I try to help Mom when I can, especially since she's carrying my little sister, or brother. But most of the time she insists on doing things herself. I never thought I'd want more chores. October 9th, 1915. Nothing much happened today other than a sheep escaped for about a half minute before Dad caught her. Ain't really sure why I opened this book. October 12th, 1915. Dad's bringing a friend of his up here to go hunting. His name's Stan. Can't say I know him too well. I only met him once at church. I asked Dad if I could come with them. He said someone had to stay back and help Mom. He was right, I suppose, but that don't make me happy about it. October 13th, 1915. I woke up this morning and found it snowed in the night. It's got to be at least 3 inches. I went to see what Dad might have brought home, but he hasn't gotten back yet. Mom's real worried, and so am I. Dad's usually only gone a few hours, never all night. He's never gone hunting in those woods before neither. I told Mom I should go out and see if I can find him, but she didn't care much for that idea at all. Says I'll get lost too. Says we should just wait. so I suppose that's what we're gonna do. October 14th, 1915. Dad's still gone. I told Mom that someone was gonna have to be looking for them, and since she's pregnant, it was gonna have to be me. She began to cry, saying she ain't gonna lose her entire family. Then she said if he wasn't back tomorrow, she'd send me into town to get help. I didn't want her any more upset than she already was, so I agreed. But I know he ain't gonna be back tomorrow, and if he's hurt, he's gonna need help quick. So when Mom went to bed, I grabbed the shotgun by the door and some shells. I took a lantern too. If I find Dad and Stan, I'll help them back home and Mom will be happy, and if I don't, I'll come home and she'll never know. October 16th, 1915. I think I'm lost. I followed the footprints leading into the forest thinking I'll find them in no time, but that damn snow kept falling and the footprints began to fade, till I couldn't see them anymore, at least not with my little lantern. But I wasn't gonna let this stop me. I kept walking where I figured they must have been going. This foolish idea went as well as one might suspect. That lantern ain't worth dirt. I didn't know I was on a hill till I was rolling down it. I hit my head against a rock on the way down. Everything went black. I woke up the next morning half buried in snow, but by the good grace of the Lord, I didn't break any bones. I climbed back up the hill to find that the snow had erased my tracks, just the same as the others. I thought if I had just kept walking straight, I'd end up back home. But after a half hour, I was still in the woods. I kept on wandering in every direction without finding nothing but more trees and snow. Like the damn thing goes on forever. Didn't see a single animal either. Not one squirrel, nor bird. Like these woods are dead. I did find a small cave. I reckoned it'd be better than sleeping under a tree, but I didn't get any sleep. Something strange started howling soon as I closed my eyes. It didn't sound like any wolf I know of. Ain't really sure how to describe it. But it was close. Much closer than I would have liked. I thought I might have been trying to sleep in its home, so I kept the gun ready. It didn't stop until the sun began to peek through the trees. Only then could I rest. I awoke about midday. I wonder if Mom is alright. Probably not too happy. I hope she didn't come looking for me like a fool. Like me. I hope she goes and gets help. October 17th, 1915. I think it's the next day, but I ain't sure. Ain't sure of anything. I began another day of hopelessly trying to escape the woods. I don't think they ever end. I think home may be 1,000 miles away, if even that close. I came across some footprints. They were bigger than a bear and had inch-long claws. Next to them seemed to be the marks from something being dragged along. I followed them. I know it wasn't smart, but it was something. Something in a forest of nothing. As I followed, I'd find blood around the tracks every now and again. I kept walking till I came across a cave. This one was much larger than the one I used for a shelter. There was something inside. It was a giant beast, hunched over, eating something. There was blood all around the mouth of the cave. I saw the bones of the creature's back poking through its gray skin. I stood frozen and started to cry. I wasn't sure why at the time, but now I believe it was because I knew who it was eating. Before I could make too much noise, a hand went over my mouth and I was dragged behind a nearby rock. It was Stan. He gestured for me to be quiet and asked for the shotgun. I gave him it. I asked him what happened to his gun. He told me he dropped it while running away from that beast. Then I asked where Dad was. He didn't answer. I tried keeping my tears quiet, but I failed. In the blink of an eye, that antlered monster had its jaws in my leg. I screamed in pain before Stan shot it in the face. It released me and turned toward him. He then shot it in the chest. This didn't seem to do much good other than making it mad. The gun was now empty, but the monster was enraged. Stan ran off into the never-ending forest with the abomination gaining behind him, leaving me alone. It was going to catch him, and kill him, and drag him back here. And then it was going to do the same to me. I got up and began limping away. I kept my eyes closed until I was past the cave. I didn't want to see what was inside. I didn't get far before falling through the earth. Now I'm stuck in a hole. I don't think it's a work of nature. It's much too deep for that. It seems instead to be a trap, dug by a demon. I'm not sure how long it will be before it finds me. One of my legs are broken, and the other has been badly wounded by that beast. I can't get out. The skin around the bite wound is beginning to turn gray, and I feel sick as a dog. Mom, if you find this, I love you. And also, run. Since I was young, my grandfather always told me not to go into the woods during the winter. He meant the Hotican Woods, located near the border of our reserve, and not just any old forest. This always struck me as a scare tactic to keep the children from getting lost, or climbing the trees which were so tall, you might think they were brushing against the clouds. That was, until this morning. The day was going as per usual. I woke up and walked over to my grandparents' house to greet her for our morning cup of coffee, but something felt off this morning. I am not sure if it was just me still being tired from a shortened sleep due to the storm that had practically terrorized our grounds, but nonetheless, something was wrong. When I walked up those old steps on the front porch, it reminded me of the days I would go there as a young kid, and jump up as many steps as possible because I was scared of something living under the porch grabbing my ankle as I was walking up. Of course, this was just a nonsense fear, and I haven't done that for years. I knocked on the door in a way that wouldn't startle them in their older age, and after about 15 seconds, my grandmother opened the door. This is where I noticed something wasn't the same. As she pulled the door open, she looked up at me with an almost confused look. She opened her mouth as if she were about to speak and ask what I was doing here, but her mouth closed and she remained silent. "Good morning, Grandma. How was your sleep?" I asked her to break the silence so we could move on with our morning routine. She looked at me once again. This time her eyes appeared diluted and scared. "Your grandfather hasn't come home since yesterday evening," she said in a timbre voice. With this news, I didn't immediately know what to say. My grandfather was practically a seasoned veteran around these grounds and rarely got lost. I took the initiative to ask the question that I feared I already knew the answer to. "Where did he go last?" I said shyly. When I asked this question, she stared into my eyes once again and said, "He went into the forest." My stomach dropped. My brain suddenly filled with all the memories of him telling me how dangerous it was during the winter. I told her not to worry and that he probably just got invested into a hunt and lost track of time. She still seemed off and was barely speaking to me, as if she was coming in and out of a daydream. Finally, I told her I was going to look for him. After all, what did I have to fear? It was the middle of the day, and I have never been one to believe in these kinds of myths and stories that grandparents tell the youth to scare them. I should have believed them. I began to walk away, climbing down those porch stairs again, when I heard my grandmother finally speak up once again. "He always liked those trees." She mumbled from behind me. I turned my head to see her staring up in the sky, smiling, and she slowly lowered her eyes down and met my own, still smiling. I would be lying if I said that this didn't at least creep me out. I mean, your husband is missing, and you are smiling and remembering how he enjoyed the trees? I don't understand. Regardless, I will do my duty and see if I can find him. I walked for about 30 minutes, give or take, until I finally reached the border of the infamous woods which I had been so repeatedly warned about. Seemed normal to me, just a beautiful winter day where the bare trees held a couple inches of snow on each branch. A small amount of wind in the air, just enough to blow the snow around from time to time, but not enough to whistle. I began walking. Luckily, the snow was only a few inches deep, and my boots were high enough to cover until just below my knees. I walked and I walked, calling out, "Grandpa, Grandpa," over and over again in hopes he would hear me. He didn't respond. That was until I could have sworn that I heard someone whistling near the large oak tree, about 100 feet in front of me. I began walking towards the whistle, but I started getting a strange feeling and the hairs on my body began to stand up as I got closer. The whistle was not caused by wind, but it didn't sound like it was created by a person either. It was a single note, dragged out for about 10 seconds at a time, never changing. I neared the tree but didn't see anyone. I did the only thing left that I could do. I began to raise my head and look up. There he was, tangled in the branches with what looked like every limb on his body being broken, as if he had fallen from the top but got stuck on the way to the ground. I began to cry and scream for help, but then I heard that whistle again. Same note, same length. I looked up again, but this time his eyes were wide open, and his pupils were dilated just like my grandmother's this morning when I met her for coffee. I am not proud of what happened next, but honestly, I don't know what anyone else would have done. I ran as fast as I could back to the reserve. I was running, crying, screaming, and just hoping to see another pair of eyes that looked normal so I could get that image out of my head. I wanted to see my grandmother, but I was scared of her, and I was not sure if I could handle it. But of course I had to tell someone that my grandfather is in that tree, and potentially alive. I went back to my place first, to calm myself down as I was not even entirely sure what just happened was real. It took about 5 minutes to calm down, have some water, and get prepared to handle this situation I am now directly in the middle of. Finally, I opened my front door ready to deal with whatever I had just experienced. I began to run over to my grandparents' house again, almost tripping because my boots were not great for running, but I didn't care. I just had to get to their house. I got to the stairs of the porch and began to climb them just like I do every morning, and just as I was about to knock on the front door, I heard something I couldn't believe. The whistle. The same one I heard in the woods not long ago. My body froze. Every hair on my body stood up once again, and I was struck with the most fear I had ever felt in my life as I saw my grandmother and grandfather staring at me through the front window, both smiling with huge black eyes, and then whistling that same note in unison. I turned and ran as fast as I could, still hearing that same note being whistled in the distance, not stopping until I reached my house. I slammed the door behind me and locked it immediately. There was immediate silence. The kind of silence that makes you feel uneasy and anxious. A silence that is so loud it was deafening. I shut the blinds and sat in my house alone, left to think about what I had just experienced. The only thing I could think to do was write about it so I could reflect and see if I am going crazy or not. Maybe I am. Who knows? Maybe I imagined the entire thing because honestly, that would be better than it being real. Update. It's been many hours since it happened and it's getting dark outside, which makes me feel scared. But I am going to try and sleep so I can figure out what I am going to do tomorrow. I hope I go to my grandparents' house and everything is normal. I just want my normal life back. Nothing strange has happened since I've been home. It's just been silent. At one point I could have sworn I heard something moving under my bed. But that just makes me sound like a paranoid kid, and I'm sure it was just my imagination. Update 2. I heard the moving again. This time it was more aggressive and audible. I screamed when I heard it, but I am too scared to check. It has been about 30 minutes since it happened, and I don't know what else to do other than write. I'm scared to run. I'm scared to check. I am scared to even make any noise, but I need someone to know what happened to me if I go missing. Update 3. Someone just whistled. Same note, same length. And it's coming from under my bed. As a child, I always had an imaginary friend of sorts. His name was Benjamin and he was very friendly, often keeping me company while my parents were out for errands or work. He looked to be in his mid-40s and had always struck me as a father. The catch is, Mom and Dad were never able to see him, and just assumed that I was playing around and that Benjamin was a figment of my imagination. As years passed and I grew older, Benjamin's image seemed to distort. His face seemed to change ever so slightly year after year. His nose would look broken, one of his eyes slightly higher than the other. His fingers would look increasingly gnarled. He did not look like the Benjamin I once knew. It got to a point where I had to block him out. I ignored him, his presence, and his voice. I constantly pestered my parents so much about Benjamin being a nuisance that we moved out when I was about 12. Safe to say, Benjamin was never seen or heard from again, and I slowly forgot about my former imaginary friend. Fast forward to the present. I'm now 18, and I am still living in the new house with my parents. I also now have a beautiful baby sister, Margaret, who is 5 years old today. I was in the process of building my life, preparing to enter society as an adult. I took a job, was studying harder in school, and although I don't have a girlfriend yet, I was quite content with my achievements so far. Things started going downhill from there. I returned home one day, and I had a sense that something was wrong. There was an awful, unexplainable pressure and malignant presence that had the air in the house feel heavy. It felt suffocating. Although it was around 3 p.m., the house looked eerie and dim, with the sunlight barely making it past the windows. I didn't think much of it. That was a mistake. Everything I worked for started crumbling slowly. I got fired from my job for some unreasonable excuse. My friends started distancing themselves after hearing a rumor about me, and my sister was constantly falling ill. My health was also deteriorating, barely getting enough sleep and losing my appetite despite feeling hungry just minutes before. I was also losing my focus in class, and my grades plummeted. That's when I saw him again. His dark hair plastered to his forehead, his bony fingers, his imposing frame, that ear-to-ear grin that looked as if his lips should have been there to cover those teeth covered in dried blood. And those eyes, those empty, soulless eyes that still somehow radiated anger. He only started showing up in my peripheral vision. I'd notice him, then blink and look again, and he was gone. I took it as severe sleep deprivation and that I was hallucinating. God, I thought to myself, I should really fix my sleep schedule. Right before I was going to sleep one night, I saw him again in the corner of my room. I tried to ignore him again, but this time he spoke. "Why did you leave?" His raspy voice broke from what was left of his vocal cords. "I gave you all my time and you abandoned me in that hellhole." It was true. The old house was unusually run down, and I overheard my parents talking about some jar of human remains found behind a fake wall in the attic. However, my parents were young and in need of a place to stay while they worked out their finances. I couldn't move. I watched as he floated over to me. My chest got heavier. I felt each breath become increasingly harder to take. I watched as he came closer and closer, his bony fingers reaching for my chest. I did the only thing I could. I prayed. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I've never been particularly religious, but found myself praying over and over again. As he screamed and retreated back into the darkness, I felt control of my body return. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I told my parents everything that happened. We ended up calling a priest who got the entire house cleansed. However, he said that it would only be temporary, and the only way to get rid of it is... Please save me. Please picture Benjamin, a rotting corpse with bony fingers, a skeleton-like frame, with patches of decaying skin falling off his arms, neck, and face. Picture what little strands of hair he has left, clinging on to his peeling scalp. Picture his bottomless eyes, those dark spheres that are completely devoid of life, and most importantly that wide, wide grin that stretches from his cheeks down to his chin. With sharp teeth, no, fangs that are caked with blood. Picture him staring at you out of the corner of your eye. His name is Benjamin, and he hung himself after killing and cannibalizing children to avoid capture by the police. Please picture him and remember the details. Everything about him. That is the only way to get rid of the curse. I'm sorry to have passed him on to you, but I've already lost everything. I don't want him to take more of my life away. I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry. I woke up due to a burning sensation spreading to my bare skin. The floor felt hot, and hard as steel, but burning hot in the first place. As my sight focused, returning from the slumber, I've noticed an enraged, bearded face above me, shouting something. My head ached as if it was a piñata that managed to survive the party, and the vision was all blurry and hazed. What the hell happened yesterday? I thought to myself. Wait, am I naked? Get to your feet, it's heating. The bearded face's voice finally broke through my sluggish perception. What? What are you? I felt that my bare buttocks and feet are getting stung by the heat, so I've rushed all the speed I had left to stand straight, almost losing conscious again, as blood rushed from my head into my limp body. I quickly looked around. It seemed that we were inside of a room with no windows and all the surfaces covered in sheets of metal. A massive iron door with a valve and a speaker on the wall. A part of Beardy and me, there were 4 more naked men with us, all of them jumping from one foot to another, trying to avoid the burns from the heating up floor. What the hell, man? What's going on here? Who are you people? Why are we naked? I shot all the questions at once, looking into angry and somewhat confused face of the beard guy. I don't know. Anyone, do you remember your names? He shouted back over his shoulder. Silence was the answer, which was interrupted by static from the speaker, until somebody on the other side picked up and tuned the mic. Ah, so I see you're all up and performing. Good. That resulted in 6 angry men screaming chaotically things like, "What the hell? Show yourself!" and "Let me out." But the voice continued. At this point you might be thinking, why am I here? What is this place and why can't I remember anything, right fellas? Right, well, the sweet treat I gave you should block most of the memories for, let's see, 8 more hours I think. By that time, I expect you to do a couple of things. 1, repent for your sins, and 2, make it while you still last. You, who do you think you are? A judge, Lord Almighty? Beardy shouted back, but no response followed. Meanwhile, I've started sweating like a pig. It was hot. 6 of us were trapped in an improvised oven by a psychopath, who decided to execute his punishment on us, but what for? We're gonna die either of suffocation or get roasted alive, the guy behind me said. I will call him Inky, as he had a massive chest tattoo of an eagle alongside many smaller ones. First of all, don't panic. We should be able to find our way out if we work together, the skinny old man replied, whom I will name Gramps. I've tried the door already. It won't budge an inch. Beardy replied, dropping sweat to the ground as he jumped up and down. You two, any ideas? Gramps asked the rest of the men. As I looked over Beardy's shoulder, I suddenly realized that one of the 2 guys left had only a single leg. That made it extra hard for him to avoid the heat, so his partner was holding the crippled man's arm over his shoulders, helping him jump all together with him. Also, that Samaritan had long blonde hair that was soaked in sweat, so I've named those 2 Pirate and Bon Jovi. Don't ask. I wasn't thinking straight. And no fresh ideas from those 2. The heat was still bearable. It burned, but like the desert sand when the sun is at its peak. Some minutes passed and we didn't come up with anything. Guys tried the door a couple of times again. Joining forces didn't result in anything either. Solid. We discussed if we could use walls somehow, but those had no broad dents or holes, which we could hold on to, preventing our feet touching the frying pan below. The ceiling was out of reach too, way too high. That's where the dehydration started to kick in slowly, making my temples pound and my lips to crack. Losing all that water with sweat sped up the things in rapid manner. I saw Inky sucking on blood from his bruised, dry lips instinctively, and suddenly he said, I think I may have killed somebody. Out of the blue. We all stared back at him. The taste of blood in my mouth? It reminds me. This metallic taste, you know? I remember it, and I'm sure the blood was not mine. Mine is less sweet, or something. Everybody had to think. This didn't explain anything. But wait, is this the sin that jerk talked about? What does the rest of us have to do with it? Bon Jovi's son. Well, maybe we're a gang of mass murderers, and we're all involved in some slaughter. Just a guess. I've said. Yeah, especially this guy over there who can't stay straight for a minute. Gramps laughed back. The speaker broke our conversation with some more static and then spew out next words. Oh, gentlemen. Having some good times, are we? I think it's time to speed up your thinking. Let's spice it up a bit, shall we? Jokes were over. In a course of the couple next minutes, I felt with my soles that the temperature went up. Now it was really hard to focus as the steel below me was burning like 1,000 stings, puncturing the harsh skin on my feet. All of us started to jump even more intensively, just to stay that half a second away from the smoldering surface. Lack of fresh air, dehydration, and extremely hot surroundings ripped the first victim. All of a sudden, Gramps collapsed to his knees, reaching out for his chest as if he was suffocating. "Stand back. Give him space." Beardy rushed to the old man, raising him up, holding him over in the same manner Bon Jovi was treating the pirate. I've lowered my eyes to Gramps' knees. Those were reddish and swollen from contacting the hot surface with his tender, elderly skin. "I think I'm a paramedic," Beardy said. "What?" several of us replied. As I rushed to pick him up, I got a feeling that I did this many times before. "Like a job, you know?" he said. "So we have a guy who thinks he killed somebody and a guy claiming he is a paramedic?" The pirate coughed with wheezy breath. "Nice, well, I'll be a royal majesty then, lads." He laughed in a hoarse voice. We used all our brain power which was available to us, considering we had to jump constantly not to get burned too bad, especially considering there were two people who couldn't do this on their own now. It came back as nothing. The crackling silence of heating air was cut in half with the sudden microphone-to-speaker feedback noise and the message from our torturer. "I could do this all day, but unfortunately I have other errands to care about. So how about we heat our thing a couple degrees up?" That wild feedback sound gave me a numb feeling somewhere at the back of my skull, as if I've heard that sound many times before. "I think I'm a sound technician," I said. "That sound the speaker made, I think I've heard that millions of times before, but that's just my guess." Nobody was amused with this piece of information. It made things even harder. "I think he passed away," Beardy said soon, checking the old man's pulse. Grim silence hung in the air as all of us stared at the skinny, lifeless body twitching intact of bearded man's jumps. "Drop him. Let's use his body so others can survive." Inky quickly muttered, "That's our chance." Everybody kept their thoughts on right and wrong to themselves, and then Beardy just let the old man's arm go. The heated steel hissed quietly as the dead flesh landed on the ground. I guess I would throw up if I weren't so dehydrated at that point. Without consulting with the rest of us, Bon Jovi jumped towards the dead body, dragging the pirate with him, putting his only leg atop of Gramps' remains. He nodded to us as if in, "I guess it's the right thing to do," and we nodded back, without saying a word. The body below hissed more intensively as pressure was applied. We were stuck in a nightmare, though we were too confused and tired to break into mindless panic. "Hold up, gentlemen. That's considered cheating. Plus, how are you going to see the whole picture now, as one of you, well, retired? You leave me no choice. Let's boost your thinking." The speaker cracked through. In the passing couple of minutes, it became just unbearable. I've checked the swollen skin on my feet. Blisters started to form, which resonated with blind pain each time I landed back on the floor. The suffering was debilitating. Bon Jovi had enough. He climbed atop the broiling rests of the old man alongside the crippled guy, positioning his burnt feet on the head and the rib cage, while the pirate had his on the pelvis. both of them balancing, trying not to fall. Moments later, Inky just snapped. I think hysteria got to him. He suddenly just started screaming something like, "No, no, Jesus, no, no, I can't take it anymore." Then he ran towards the two atop the corpse, intending to kick them off and take their place, but something went wrong. He fell over and collapsed to the ground. What I heard next will probably haunt me for the rest of my life. That wasn't a scream. No, that was an animal roaring in pain. Inky rolled over the floor, with bits of his burnt skin sticking to hot steel here and there, tearing away from his naked body. Wailing, crying, bellowing of pain, he tried to get up a couple of times, though he slipped on the blood pouring from his numerous wounds, until, in some confusing motion, he banged his head over the steel-covered wall and fell silent, leaving us with dread feeling of impending doom. As the pain became unbearable, I've checked that the guy was done and in a single rapid motion crossed the room, finishing atop of his back. It felt like running over razor blades soaked in acid. It was becoming harder to see around, as the liquids from the dead bodies evaporated, polluting the hot air. While I didn't pay much attention to my surroundings, I was finally able to focus. Beardy was quiet for quite some time now. I've checked to the left and to the right. The huge guy somehow managed to climb to the door, so to speak. He had both of his roasted feet soaking with ichor on the valve, balancing, fighting for his life. Or at least that was my perception of things. Because in reality, that was still a question of, when will he snap? And then my brain reacted to the gruesome fact. He was not battling for his life. He was alternating the ending. Somehow that bear of a man was able to chew through the skin of his arms, one after another, and as the crimson stream fell down, seeming not to reach the floor, evaporating on the fly, he stood there repeating, "Just not like this, man. Just not like this." In a couple of minutes that lasted like eternity, his eyes rolled back and his body hit the ground. The choking smell of his beard burning hit my nostrils. A couple of minutes passed. Three of us had nothing to say. Nobody was trying to remember. Nobody had the hope of surviving. We were just there, standing on the remains of unlucky strangers coping with the inevitable. Have you ever cut a whole baked turkey? Or a chicken, maybe? I won't ever in my life. Why? The meat produces this quiet sound of tissue ripping when you stick the knife with pressure. That's what just happened to Bon Jovi and the pirate. The old man's body cooked through, just as horrible as it sounds, but way much worse when you see it. It just ripped into two parts, separating the spine from all the conjoining tissues. It played against two exhausted men trying to balance, so both of them flew to their backs. I saw surprise and horror in their faces. They were not ready. Inhuman screams filled the room once again while two charred bodies rolled through the agony to the other side. I cried silently, grieving on their souls, unable to shed a single drop of tears, understanding that this fate keeps crawling towards me. Just please, open the door. Please let me out. I don't want to die. I whined to gods, celestial beings, and whomever could hear me in this situation. Static, and then the same voice. Well, I can't resist if you ask nicely. Go ahead. Something clicked at the back side of the door. You're free to go. I couldn't believe my ears. What kind of sick joke is this? This made no sense. What about repenting the sins and all that stuff? But I had no time to waste. What if all of this was just a bluff to prolong my suffering? I carefully balanced my way on roasted flesh of Inky, making every step count so I don't slip off to the immolating end of being burned alive. But the distance to Beardy's body was way too far to jump over to. Besides, the charred corpse couldn't take the pressure on impact. I bit my lower lip as hard as I could and ran across, leaving the skin of my soul sticking to the ground, leaving me with bleeding feet and bitten lip, but still alive. Standing on the massive corpse, I reached towards the valve and, to my surprise, it turned easily, crack opening the door to my escape. Cool air hit hard on my face as I crawled on my way from the devilish room through a dark corridor. It still wasn't over. I wasn't safe yet. As I had not that many options, I just went forward until I got to the only source of light I could notice. There was a small room at the corridor ending with a table, some files, a monitor, which showed the gruesome picture of roasted bodies and some audio equipment. While I was catching my breath, I couldn't help but pick up one of the files. It was Inky's. His name was Richard Adams. He was a barber, not a killer. Next came Beardy, or Ben Willis, the cook in a restaurant. The rest were Neil Scott, ex-construction worker who suffered a work incident, Graham Nelson, an old school teacher, and finally Josh Rudy, university student. And of course there was I, Philip Jones, the zookeeper. There was no connection. Our revelations about being paramedics and killers were just fake memories and guesses. This made absolutely no sense. You might wonder why I did this to you. I realized a hooded figure stood in the distance, hidden in dark shadows casted by the light on the table. I wanted to answer. I wanted to ask questions, but my mouth was too dry. I couldn't make a sound. I was too exhausted. Oh, not in the talking mood? Okay. I'll tell you anyways. The figure came closer. I still couldn't see his face as he leaned to me and said, "No particular reason." I felt the sting of the needle to my neck and the world faded to black. After I recovered from the hospital, thought a lot about what happened. Police were all over the place, but with such poor data, the investigation is not going very fast. People keep going missing around the city. Somebody leaves. Somebody becomes the natural disaster victims. Some die to gunshots and end up in rivers and lakes, with weight attached to them. That doesn't scare me anymore. I will never recover from being the last man standing. I'm afraid that he won't stop there. I am so afraid to wake up naked again. Dreams. Dreams can sometimes be pleasant. Sometimes they are just completely random things your mind can conjure up while you sleep. Most of us forget dreams once we wake up, a majority of them. Some do stick though. I think everyone has at least one dream that stuck. From what I hear, it's mostly nightmares that stick. A scary experience is what we remember. It can be completely random, or it can be due to some horror movie you watched. I didn't have so much a dream or a nightmare, as I did have a vision of sorts. Let me go back a bit. This happened about a week ago. I just came back from a visit to my mom's place, needed to help her with some groceries. She has back problems. Anyways, I get back home and I am exhausted, more than I'd anticipated. I'm not a pro athlete or something, but I do have some good stamina. I also had a considerable amount of caffeine in my blood, which, in normal circumstances, would keep me awake. These were, I'm pretty sure, not normal circumstances. It was Friday, so I figured a quick nap wouldn't hurt. It was still early, around 10 in the morning. I do have to mention that I was on vacation, so I didn't have to go to work. Well, my vacation was mostly lounging at home and just resting, occasionally visiting my mom or going out for a drink with my friends. But I digress. I set up my alarm clock to wake up at around 12 or 12:30. Can't remember exactly. After that, I just collapsed on my bed, feeling more exhausted than ever for no discernible reason. The moment I closed my eyes, all of that tiredness just disappeared. I opened my eyes once again. I felt normal, as if nothing happened. I checked my phone and it was still 10 a.m. 10:13, if I remember correctly. Strange. I muttered to myself and get back up. I felt rested from just closing my eyes for a few moments. Wish that were the case always. I went into my living room and grabbed the remote to turn on the TV. It didn't. I just replaced the batteries. I muttered to myself as I threw the remote back onto the couch and went to the fridge to grab something to snack on. I opened the fridge to find it empty. Not just empty. Do you know that sound a fridge makes when it's working? Yeah, none of that. It was as if it were unplugged or something. And not only that, the fridge was slightly more to the right than I remember it being. Confused, I leaned forward on the adjacent counter to look if it was plugged, and after squinting my eyes for a few moments, I saw that it wasn't. After that, I decided to test something out. I tried flicking the light switch on and off, and my hunch was correct. There was an outage. That still didn't explain why my fridge was empty. I am absolutely certain that it was filled with food and drinks a few hours ago. I checked inside once again. I even reached my hand to the back. The temperature inside was the same as the room temperature. Surely it would have been colder in the fridge for some time, despite it not working for some time. Lost for any options, I grabbed my phone. It was 10:20. I tried going into Google to see if there were any local power outages or some construction in the local area which might have caused the outage. No reception, no internet connection. I checked if I was connected to my router, which of course wouldn't work without electricity. I wasn't. I was on mobile data. I'm pretty sure the numbers on the router were a bit different. I thought to myself for a second after registering that the numbers on the back of the router were slightly off as well, but I had more pressing matters to worry about. I tried calling my mom to see if she knows what's going on. No reception. I was just rerouted to an automated voice message. I was starting to be a little freaked out at this point. My throat was dry. I wasn't thirsty, but my throat was simply dry. I didn't have any soda to drink, so I opted on drinking regular old tap water, and to my surprise, there was no running water. Then I started noticing other things, such as the fact that there were no car sounds on the outside, and I can guarantee to myself my neighbor was mowing his lawn the moment I laid down, and then abruptly stopped. What's going on? I posed the rhetorical question to myself, knowing I won't have any answers anytime soon, so I decided to go outside to see what was up. Maybe the neighbors had some idea of what was going on, I thought. Going outside, I saw that the neighborhood was different. There were no cars driving around, there were no pedestrians. The cars that were parked, including my own, looked as if they weren't turned on in ages. The grass outside was overgrown, and the entire place looked as if no one maintained it in months. The sky as well was gray and cloudy. It was a sunny, clear sky this morning. The weather broadcast didn't say it would be cloudy. I ran to one of my neighbor's houses and knocked on the door with no response. I banged on the door, shouting for someone, anyone to open the door or just give some sort of response. None came, and my voice just echoed in what seemed like an empty world. I just sulked down the door and sat down, trying to rationalize what was happening. I slapped myself multiple times, but nothing happened. I didn't wake up. Then I saw someone walking, limping down the road. It was a woman, it seemed. She looked to be dressed in business attire. I quickly got up and shouted, "Hey, excuse me, ma'am?" There was no response. I thought she didn't hear me, so I shouted once more, this time louder. "Hello, excuse me." Nothing. She didn't so much as flinch at my voice or turn her head. I decided to walk up to her. As I got closer, I started noticing some more details. Worrying details. I noticed her suit was torn at some parts. She looked pale as a ghost as well. I stopped, I would say, 10 meters from her, now a bit cautious. "I don't know what the hell..." I stopped mid-sentence. She lifted her head up toward me, still limping, inching toward me. Her eyes, her sunken eyes, had no pupils. Well, she did, but it looked like she had severe cataracts. Her eyes were completely clouded. She groaned as she approached me. I noticed a wound on her neck. The wound was old, yet it didn't heal. There was a maggot sticking out of it. I stepped back, and like in a cliché horror flick, tripped and fell on my ass. I was backing away, but she was faster. She got closer and closer until... she stepped on my foot. Well, she didn't so much as step on it, as much as she stepped through it. I froze when I saw that. She, on the other hand, continued walking and groaning as if nothing happened. She acted as if I wasn't there. She continued walking. With each step, she phased through me as if through thin air. I quickly got up and got out of her way, watching her in bewilderment. Am I dead?" I tried to say to myself in a whisper, thinking that some sort of zombie apocalypse happened and I was killed in my sleep. "I was confused as you were the first time, friend." I jumped in fear, turning around on a dime when I heard someone's voice behind me. "What?" I exclaimed. Once I turned around, I saw a man. He was, I would guess, in his mid-50s. He had a long and unkempt graying beard, and I would guess messy gray hair. He had a cap on his head. He had a long dark green jacket going down halfway to his knees and dark blue jeans. Slightly torn at some parts, all dirty and bloodied. "Who are you? What happened?" I asked. "I'll answer your questions one at a time. Let me just assure you one thing. You're not dead," he said with a slight smile on his face. It didn't seem to have malice in it. If anything, it was an amused smile. "Okay." I really didn't have anything else to add. I was a bit speechless. There was a period of silence between me and him. The sound of wind and occasional bird chirp could be heard. "Not much of a talker, I see," the man said. "All right, follow me," he added as he started walking in a seemingly random direction. "What? Wait a minute. Where to? And who are you?" I asked. He turned around and gave me a smile once more. "Come on, we ain't got all day, and it's not like those guys can eat you." He pointed to the limping woman, zombie I guess, still walking down the street. I nodded, and I started following behind him. We were walking through my neighborhood, which was now dead, overgrown, and abandoned. I saw some houses were boarded up, some were burned down, and some looked like they'd been robbed and looted a dozen times. After some time, the man began to speak. This was about a month after all went downhill. Most people were turned. No saving them, unfortunately. Electricity and water were shut off, as I believe you saw yourself. What you're meaning to say is that a zombie apocalypse started? When? How? I asked. When I had forgotten, how I don't know, it just happened one day without warning. He continued his brisk walk as he paused and continued. I remember the day when I heard the news. I had woken up from a nap and suddenly people were dropping dead like flies. Then they got back up. The military was overwhelmed and governments collapsed. All went to hell. He stopped abruptly. My eyes were irritated for some reason and I rubbed them. When I opened them back up again, we were somewhere else. What? Where are we? I asked. The convenience store, remember? The man said as I looked around, and sure as hell, this was the store I went to regularly. Though it saw better days, I must admit. The shelves were empty. There was all sorts of junk on the floor, and a couple of corpses. What caught my attention was an old sign for Coca-Cola. It was written with a K instead of a C. What? I said to myself, but before I could inquire further, I heard movement behind us. A small group of 4 people entered the store in a hurry. Barricade it, now! A familiar voice shouted to the others, as everyone was barricading the entrance of the door with whatever they could. A horde of zombies was fast approaching the store. Then I realized the guy who shouted, though now with stubble and longer hair, was me. They, and I, didn't seem to notice us. We were invisible to them. The man who accompanied me started speaking once more. Some of us survived, barely. Their numbers were swelling by the day. No matter how many we downed, another 10 took its place. Supplies were running short. We didn't know what to do, but we pushed on despite all the odds. For the simple experience of seeing the sunrise once more, we pushed on for each other. I saw myself, my other self, and the 3 others which I didn't recognize barricade the entrance and run toward the back of the store. One of the others was limping. It looked like he was wounded. The wounded guy called for the others. Hey guys! My other self and the 2 others turned around. Come on, get going! One woman in the group said, I'm bit. That thing under the car got me a few minutes ago. Everyone looked at each other, not sure as to what to do. I'm staying. The guy who was bitten said, Don't waste bullets on me. You'll attract even more of them here. He added. I looked at my other self, reaching for his side. Presumably a pistol. Everyone simply nodded and ran off. Well, the guy who was bitten turned around and raised his crowbar as the horde was tearing down the makeshift barricade, if you could even call it that. This happens. People died, the bearded man said. Then my eyes irritated once again. Once I rubbed them, we were somewhere else. This time we were in a town, a small town. The sky was clear and the town itself was overgrown and abandoned. There were a few stragglers on the streets. They were severely decomposed and barely walking. The bearded man started speaking once again. Riverside's the name, a town which was once home to around 5,000 residents. Tight-knit families, a single police station, 2 schools, fire department, and a shooting range. Lots of farmland on the outskirts and a small forest not too far from here as a nature reserve of sorts. Despite the name being Riverside, the river is about 5 miles east of the town itself. As soon as he finished his sentence, I could hear car engines in the distance. I turned around to see a column of cars. As they neared, I could see that they were old and beaten down, but drivable. As I could see, of course, there were 6 or 7 of them, and as they drew closer to me, they weren't slowing down. I exclaimed as I tried to move my legs, but they weren't budging. As if I was frozen in one place, I put my hands up and closed my eyes, bracing for impact. Which didn't come. The cars simply phased through me. Aha, I forgot. I said as the bearded man had a blank expression looking at me, then at the cars. Once the cars stopped, people started exiting. Some of the stragglers started walking towards the cars, but were quickly cut down by the people. Some had guns, but most of them used blunt weapons. Out of the driver's side of one gray sedan exited a familiar figure. Now with a full beard and rifle in hand was me. My other self, that is. How are we doing on gas? My other self asked. Soon another person which I didn't recognize. Well, I didn't recognize anyone, but I digress. Bad. Our car's running on fumes. I saw as my other self swore under his breath. Right. Guys, let's clear the area. Take anything that could be useful. Food, medicine, weapons, you know the gist. My other self said in a confident tone. I can't believe I would be a leader in this kind of situation. I always thought I would be dead within the first week. Huh. I said to myself, kind of surprised at my ability to adapt and survive, to even lead. The bearded man chimed in. Yes, I too was surprised, but you kind of get used to it. Believe me. I didn't pay much attention to him, as I did to the group of 20 or so people systemically going from building to building, looting it, and killing unsuspecting undead inside. Unbeknownst to them, for now at least, is that store down the street. See it? The bearded man pointed down the street to some small corner store. I nodded and he continued. That small store has a basement which is under lock and key. Good thing that guy over there. He pointed to a guy coming out of the building with a handful of some tools. That guy is a good lockpick. And behind that locked door, and down the stairs, is an untouched store of canned food. Enough to last half a year, maybe more. That was enough time to establish some kind of permanent settlement. A farm not too far from here still had some seeds. We used that to kickstart some kind of agriculture, and life seemed to be better and better from there on out. As soon as he finished his sentence, time began to speed up. Like a time lapse, I saw people become lines in the air, moving too fast to perceive. I saw as day and night lasted for mere seconds each. I saw some days were sunny, some cloudy. Sometimes it rained. Sometimes it snowed. I saw as the buildings were slowly repaired. I saw makeshift walls erected around the small town, and I saw more and more people come. I saw as the seasons came and went. I saw the harvest, and I saw how the fields were plowed each year. I saw life return to normal. Time slowed down to normal speed this time, and I saw that the once abandoned and overgrown town grew to a lively settlement with people going about their lives with little worry. Though in the distance I saw a small group of people gathered around something. Rather, it was someone. There were 2 people arguing about something, and the argument was quite heated. I couldn't tell what they were arguing about, but I could see from that distance that the people in question were an older fellow and some younger guy. The older guy seemed familiar. Long, dark, green jacket, a cap on his head, slightly torn jeans. Just when it clicked. Bang. The younger guy pulled out a pistol and shot the bearded man point blank in the chest. I looked to my right to see what I would now call a ghost. The bloody patch on his jacket was on the same spot where he'd been shot. I looked back at the growing commotion that was happening. The people nearest to us were now alerted because of the gunshot. They rushed to see what happened, though despite the shouts and overall chaos that was now happening, I could hear a woman's voice scream someone's name, shriek in pain, but not the kind of pain where she is physically hurt. No, it sounded like that time my mother screamed when she heard Dad was dead. She screamed his name, but this time, the name which the woman was screaming was... it was my name. The bearded man, the ghost, whilst gazing into the forming crowd, though it looked like he was gazing through them, spoke. All living things live, and they die. No matter if there is no more room in hell, room shall be made. Every life is a story, be it an apocalypse and cataclysm, or in times of abundance and prosperity. It is always a story of life and death. One day you will awake and you will find yourself in another world, a world that is completely different from where you once were, and you will relive the story. Your world will not be gone. You will simply be yanked from your comfort and thrown into chaos like you were today. But then you will not be as untouchable, he said, turning his head to look at me. This is the story of how I died. He paused. I felt something tug on my arms forcefully, launching me backwards. This is the story of how you died. I opened my eyes. My alarm was blaring and my heart was just about ready to catapult itself out of my chest. I looked at my phone and saw that it was 12:30. I quickly got up and turned on my TV. It worked and my fridge was as how I remember it. Full. It took me a good hour to completely recover from that... dream? No, it felt all too real. But it wasn't reality. Something was off. Yes, there was some sort of apocalypse. Zombies roamed the earth for God's sake. But something was off. The K on the Coca-Cola sign and the signs on the roads were not in the same place. Though withered and beaten, I could see the difference. And my house. The fridge. The numbers on the router. It was as if I was in another alternate universe. And most importantly, the older and dead version of myself, what he told me was that I will be awoken in that place. That I will be thrown into chaos. I couldn't ask him when, why, or how. Just when I felt that I calmed down, I noticed something. I looked down at my arms to see red handprints right at the place where I was grabbed by something. I feel as if I am going insane. Almost a week has passed. Everything seems normal. The internet is working fine. The news is nothing out of the ordinary, and I can't help myself but be constantly anxious. I can't sleep. I'm afraid if I fall asleep and wake in that place again, and that I will feel that bullet one day hit my own chest, in that dirty, dark, green jacket. Greetings to anyone reading this. I hope your day is going better than mine. My name is Eli Matthews, and by the time you read this, I will be dead. I work for an energy company that the government runs, and we have made a colossal mistake. A quick overview of what I am working on. Long before I began, a team of researchers discovered what they thought to be an alternate dimension that lies close in proximity to ours. They came up with plans to reach it, but the technology just never advanced enough to get there. It's like being in front of a locked door that could take you anywhere, but you can't find the key. That's where I come in. I was contracted by the government to take part in this project. I guess they thought I fit the bill for what they were working on, and when I saw the paycheck they were offering, I couldn't turn it down. After signing what felt like a never-ending stack of waivers and non-disclosure agreements, I was on my way to an off-book site in Washington State's countryside. I have a PhD in physics and have published a few papers that have helped me gain a strong foothold in my field. I'm no genius compared to a lot of people, but I have learned how to hold my own over the years. This is why when I was offered the job, I jumped at it because it seemed like a great chance to increase my knowledge. When I got the rundown of what I would be working on, I felt like I had just been given the opportunity of a lifetime. I mean, who wouldn't want to attempt to reach another place outside of our universe? A place that could reveal knowledge that would blow our fundamental understandings out of the water. It made me feel like I was one of the explorers of old, reaching untainted land for the first time. The leader of this whole thing was a lady named Dr. Amelia Gray. She was a physicist like myself, and she had already been working on the project for a while when I arrived. She was an attractive woman, around 35 years old, with short black hair. She was respected by everyone at the facility, and was a stern leader who knew how to give orders. After around 3 years of grueling work, we finally had what we thought was a working prototype that could finally pull off the impossible. We decided to call it the Mayflower after the boat that brought the pilgrims to the New World. This was the 6th rendition of the gate that we created that should allow us to pass through into this new place. The previous gates either didn't work altogether, or would only hold the proper conditions for a few seconds. The Mayflower should be able to hold it indefinitely as long as there is sufficient power provided. I say this because the Mayflower consumes enough energy to power a small city. The first day of testing began. For the first test, we were sending in a rover that was made by the engineers here at the lab. This rover was made with state-of-the-art technology that made it suitable for any environment. The rover was controlled by remote control and had to be attached via cable so we could keep the connection once it passed through. "All systems checked. Ready on your command," an operator said as he looked at Dr. Gray for approval. She raised her arm and held out a thumbs up from the elevated room we were in. "Gate opening in 3, 2, 1. I remember looking at the gate as the white hog rings that surrounded the machine began speeding up, and a loud hum filled the room. Then an impossibly dark portal appeared in the center. We had actually done it. The years of hard work had finally paid off. The rover we had equipped with just about everything you could think of rolled up just a few feet shy of the black abyss that awaited. There were people decked out in protective suits doing a last once-over before we sent it through. They gave us the all-clear, and we were finally ready. The team began inching the rover forward, and after a few moments the front half of the machine was through, then the back, and it was gone. There were a few applauses and people cheering. Then everyone looked up at the big screen we had in the front of the room to display the camera feed. The screen showed static for a moment, and then lit up, giving us our first ever view of this new place. Everyone in the room fell silent. We weren't getting an image at all, just darkness. Then the lights switched on from the rover, and we were given a few feet of visuals. This place seemed to have some sort of fog that blanketed everything. Even from the high-powered beams that the rover provided, it was struggling to get through just a few feet of it. It was a place encompassed by darkness. The ground that we could make out looked almost charred, like it had been scorched by some of the most intense heat imaginable. That's when we decided to cut the microphone. The winds in this place were so strong that they could put out most hurricanes to shame. The anemometer was reading wind speeds around 160 miles per hour. That wasn't what was so strange about it, though. The howls that this place produced sounded like deep guttural screams that were constantly going back and forth with each other, like a symphony of tortured souls. I remember that they shook me to my bones, and I had a cold sweat break out. I felt for the first time like we were somewhere we shouldn't be. The rover took a couple samples off the ground and got some more readings of the atmosphere, and then started its way back from where it passed through. It was getting pretty close to the portal when we heard it. There aren't words to describe the sounds this thing made. It was so low and loud that the rover itself was shaking. People in the observatory were holding their palms to their ears in hopes of drowning out its cry. "Hurry up and get the rover back through," Dr. Gray shouted to the people at the control station for the rover. They were frantically trying every control they had at their disposal when they looked over at Dr. Gray. "Ma'am, we're trying everything. The rover is not responding." Then the cry came again. I looked over at the display screen, and that's when everything went black. The only thing visible now was a text that read, "Signal lost," across the screen. Some of the rover operators started making their way to the gate. "Let's try to pull it out manually," one of the operators suggested. There is a huge winch that can be used if control is lost on the rover. The men walked over and got to work firing up the winch. It roared to life, and the cable started retracting back into the coil it was on. The thing is, after a few minutes of the cable coming in, we reached the final stretch of line, and all that came out was a severed cord. The rover was gone. The next few days were spent reviewing footage and going over data that the rover managed to send back before the signal was lost. I wasn't getting much sleep then, because every time I tried to lay down, my mind would drift and I would hear that awful cry. That's when they told me we were going to open the portal again. But this time, we would be sending people through. The day had finally come when we would fire up the gate for the final time. We went through all the procedures as last time and double-checked everything to assure no malfunctions would take place. We were sending a team of 8 through the gate. I assume most of them were military because they all had the look of highly trained individuals. The only 2 who weren't soldiers were scientists from the lab, who will be sent to gather information. They were all equipped with suits that were made to withstand the harsh environments of this other world. The soldiers were also given rifles, just in case. They won't be able to go very far due to the fact that they are attached via cables just like the rover. With that, we went through all the protocols and the gate fired up once again. "Remember, if there's any trouble, everyone is to return through the gates immediately," Dr. Gray said as she looked at the team. "You don't have to tell me twice, ma'am," one of the scientists responded. With that, each person made their way through the gates, and we were once again greeted with the dark abyss that was a trademark of this other place. Each person was equipped with a monitor that kept track of their vitals, as well as a camera to display their visuals. With everyone through, they did a systems check and set off to find the rover. The trek was slow and meticulous due to the limited visuals and high winds. After about 15 minutes of traversing, they finally came up to where the rover should have been. Over the comm system, one of the soldiers said, "Ma'am, are you sure this is the right position?" "Yes, you should be right where we lost connection," Dr. Gray said while checking her monitor again for reassurance. Everyone watched the big screen as we looked at the camera feeds, and sure enough, there was no sign of the rover. It's not like the wind would have blown it away. It was made for practically any environment. I remember wanting nothing more than for those people to get out of there. "Alright everyone, the rover's gone. Time to head back," Dr. Gray said into the microphone. With that, they began the trek back to the portal and back to safety. Unfortunately, they never got back to it. As they were coming back, that piercing cry rang out just like the last time, and everyone dropped to their knees, holding their hands to their heads. The suits they had were somewhat soundproof, which just goes to show how loud this thing was. "Pick up the pace, everyone," one of the soldiers announced. Just as he said that, Dr. Riley, who was one of the scientists on the mission vitals, disappeared and her camera feed went dark. There was no noise. She was fine 1 second and gone the next. This sent the observatory into a frenzy, and no one who was through the portal even noticed. "What just happened to Dr. Riley? Her vitals and visual just went out," Dr. Gray said to the team. They all looked around and I noticed a heart rate spike from their vital readings. "We have lost visual on Dr. Riley," a soldier responded. "Everyone spread out and look around. Make sure to have eyes on someone at all times. We don't need anyone else getting lost out here." Then the roar came again and all the screens went black. "Pull in those cables now," Dr. Gray shouted at the crew we had ready at the winch. They pulled all the cables in, and just like last time they were all severed with no clue as to what happened to the team. Then someone walked through the portal. It was Dr. Riley, but her suit was torn almost to shreds. She should have been dead, but somehow managed to walk all the way back to the portal and come through. Everyone in the observatory froze and stared at her. "You should stay where you belong," Dr. Riley said in a low, torn voice that didn't belong to her. "The place you have entered does not belong to you." I remember Dr. Gray looking at me, and I could see the fear on her face. "What happened to the team?" she asked with a shaky voice. After she said that, something happened that will forever be seared into my soul. She let out one of the most blood-curdling screams I've ever heard. Then her body started to change. She dropped to the ground, and I could hear bones breaking and flesh tearing. Her skin, which was melting off, was replaced by a viscous, black substance. Her hands elongated and crimson claws sprouted from the ends of her fingers, at least half a foot in length. Her head was morphed into something akin to a bear, and sharp, jagged teeth filled its mouth. What used to be Dr. Riley began to stand up when other things came out of the portal behind her. I can only assume that it was the rest of the crew that went in, because there are 7 of them. Each one turned into something just as awful as the next. The only similarities they have are the jet black skin and yellow glowing orbs they have for eyes now. Then what used to be Dr. Riley reached out her new arm and took a researcher's head clean off. What follows is chaos. The cries of the creatures and the rest of the people in the observatory were something that will never leave me. For what little time I have left, I saw arms, legs, torsos, and chunks of flesh strewn everywhere within seconds. The creatures seemed to have one goal, and that was to get rid of everyone here. Guards with guns began firing at the creatures, but they seemed to only get angry at us. "We need to get out of the control room," Dr. Gray said as she shook me out of my daze. "We have to make sure these things don't get out." After I took a moment to regain myself, I looked at her. "Let's go." We headed off the platform we were on and started through the observatory. The creatures were still tearing apart anyone in close proximity with no mercy whatsoever. I took Dr. Gray's hand and we made our way to the exit doors. Just as I was about to open them, one of the creatures swung at me, leaving a deep gash in my left arm, and I let out a scream. That's when one of the guards started firing at the creature. It looked at me for a second more before going to rip that poor man to shreds. We made it through the door and into the control room that's down the hall. We have locked and barricaded the door with whatever we could find. But it's not going to hold forever. There are fail-safes in this facility, in case of an accident that will lock the place down. I tried to wrap my arm the best I could, using my lab coat, but the bleeding hasn't stopped yet. The control room has cameras that cover the building. I can't bring myself to look back into the observatory. Everyone's dead. The creatures are pacing around the building, and every once in a while one will walk by the room we are in. I know we can't undo what we have done. I think we went to another world that was owned by something older and much more powerful than us, and this is our punishment for trespassing. The gate is still open in the observatory, and every once in a while this low cry rocks the building. I hope we run out of power before something else tries to get through. One of the things is at the door now. Me and Dr. Gray have accepted our fates. I just hope this place is secured enough where nothing will get out. The cries from the gate are getting louder now. If you're reading this, I'm sorry. I had just moved again, which was a tedious and not unusual occurrence. We'd been living overseas because of my dad's job, and he'd experienced some trouble at work. None of it his fault. His manager was just particularly terrible. And he exercised his return rights back to where we'd come from. It hadn't even been a year. None of us were happy with the situation, but we put up with it and headed back to the US, finding a house after a little over a month and moving right in. I won't bore you with what happened after that. It was just the regular moving things like getting our household goods and seeing a mountain of boxes everywhere we looked. It was a month after we moved in that it happened. I was unwrapping some of my things in my room. I'd picked the basement since I was older and needed my own space. I wasn't completely alone. The cat's food was in the next room, so my cat would be down there with me a lot, but for the most part, I was alone. The movers had used a lot of paper, maybe more than necessary, and I noticed too late that the paper I was holding had a strange bulge in the bottom, and the bulge turned out to be my smallest snow globe, which fell to the ground and shattered at my feet. I wasn't particularly upset. It wasn't an expensive one, just annoyed. So I went to get something to clean up the water and the glass before tossing it out. It was just a stupid little Christmas-themed thing, with a cheery reindeer depicted inside. I didn't give it a second thought as I tossed it in the trash can. The way it shattered stuck with me though. It barely made a noise, and since it had landed right on the glass part, the shards had gone everywhere. I didn't know why. Maybe it was just that it still annoyed me, since there was still glitter on the floor. I started to have weird dreams not long after, of the snow globe shattering just over and over again. The smiling reindeer's face slowly moving to the floor. Once I'd wake up in a cold sweat, but I wasn't sure why. The weirdness started after that. I'd find pieces of glass in places the snow globe never was, like under the bookcase and by my vanity. The snow globe had shattered at the foot of my bed in front of my dresser, and like I said, it wasn't that big. The dome was barely the size of a bouncy ball. At first I thought maybe I'd drag the pieces with me when I walked, but that seemed unlikely because I didn't wear shoes in the house. So if I stepped on a piece of glass, it probably would have just gone into my foot. Then I began noticing other things, mainly at night. There was a subtle, gentle knocking at the glass door in the next room that started a week after I found the glass. It was always at around 8, and honestly, I didn't even notice it at first since I'm usually awake on my phone watching videos. I didn't get worried until it started to get louder and more frequent, lasting almost all night and causing me to spend most nights paralyzed in my bed. I didn't know what it was, but I'd seen enough horror movies to know not to get up. Some nights when I could get up, I went and slept on the couch, but the noise just followed me to the living room window. The blinds were always closed, so I never saw who or what it was, and I had no desire to open it. After spending a few weeks in this anxiety-ridden existence, I decided that enough was enough. I waited until the sun went down, and when the knocking started, I gathered the courage to creep into the room next to mine. It was the laundry room, and it wasn't completely finished. The ceiling was just insulation, and the floor was gray concrete. There were a lot of boxes in there, and it was a little difficult to maneuver my way to the glass door, but I got there. There were quite a few boxes blocking it, but I could see the top half of the door, and what I saw stopped me in my tracks. There was a giant, grinning reindeer tapping its forehead rhythmically against the glass. It was the exact mirror of the one that had been in my snow globe, and I knew that one was plastic, and if this was the same reindeer, then that meant it could easily shatter the glass if it wanted to, but it didn't. It just stood there, knocking its head against the glass over and over. I didn't remember screaming or running, but when I woke up, I was on the floor of the laundry room. My head hurt, and there was daylight streaming in through the glass door. The reindeer was gone. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell my family about it, so I had to do something about this myself. I didn't know why it was after me specifically, but I figured it was because I'd broken the snow globe. Maybe it had been a cage. Or capsule of some kind. Had I freed it, and now it was after me? This was what I settled on. The next night, I grabbed my old softball bat, which I'd found earlier, and crept upstairs in nothing but my sloth pajama pants and bright yellow sleep shirt. I didn't know what I was expecting to do with the bat, but as I slipped on my flip-flops and headed out the front door, my grip on it tightened. I knew the deer would find me. It had before. I heard it before I saw it, its large plastic feet making noises in the grass behind me. I turned slowly, finding its grinning face looking down at me. It rushed me all at once, and I ran, my heart pounding in my chest into the woods to the side of my house. Branches bended and snapped all around me as I heard its crashing footsteps grow closer and closer. I could hear my heartbeat thumping in my ears as it got closer. Thump, thump, thump. That scared me a little more than the deer did, but I didn't have much time to process that before it knocked me face first into the leaf-covered dirt. I desperately grabbed at the ground with my free hand while the other gripped the bat tightly. I was screaming, I was begging, I was pleading as it lifted me up in the air with what I didn't know since it had hooves rather than hands, and turned me to look at its grinning face. That smile contorted and stretched until it was past its eyes, the mouth opening with a crack of plastic to reveal sharp teeth you wouldn't find on a deer. It also had a surprisingly moist-looking black tongue that writhed and squirmed in its gaping maw. I was nearly paralyzed with fear at this point, my wide eyes looking directly at those sharp teeth. I reacted just before it could put me in its mouth, a little jolt making me realize what was happening and causing me to swing my bat with all my might. A large crack was heard, and it dropped me back on the ground. When I finally managed to look up, I saw that it now had a crack across its face. The mouth had closed back into that cheery grin, and it simply lumbered off into the woods, without a care in the world. I didn't see it again after that, and it's been years since this incident happened, but even now, long after I've moved out of my parents' house and married my long-term boyfriend, I can still hear it occasionally, tapping gently against the glass. I don't know what sort of monster I released when I dropped a carelessly wrapped snow globe on the ground by accident in my cold basement room all those years ago, But I hope my husband never notices, because I wouldn't want anyone else to see that large, gaping maw. Hello there. Let me share my experience which resulted in major childhood trauma, all thanks to Mountain Lodge Psychiatric Center in Magaliesberg. Before I start, I have to warn you that my story contains mentions of suicide. Please delete this if you are sensitive to this subject. So, to give you some background, my grandmother and grandfather have been working at psychiatric hospitals since they were 16, so we basically grew up in and around psychiatric facilities, and were used to anything and everything, or so we thought. In 2002, my grandfather took on a position at Mountain Lodge Psychiatric Center where they stayed on the premises. During school holidays, my cousin and I would go visit and explore the grounds. From the moment they moved in there, weird stuff started happening. It was a 4-bedroom house with one long hallway stretched straight down the middle of the house, so you could basically see from the front door to the back door. The girls' room was right at the back of the house across from the bathroom. The bathroom was divided into 3 separate rooms consisting of the loo, the shower room, and a room with a bath. There was 2 basins with vanity cabinets in the communal area of the bathroom. This is important to remember. During the April school holidays in 2003, my cousin and I went to visit my granny and grandfather. We went on one of our adventures and found a waterfall. At the foot of the waterfall, we found a skull. The skull turned out to belong to a female patient who offed herself, and the hospital thought she ran away because they couldn't find her. The paranormal things were amped up from there. Not too sure if the spirit of this girl maybe followed us home. That night we went home and we were minding our business in our room and started hearing someone in the kitchen boiling the kettle on the stove, taking out mugs, the teaspoon tinkling on the side of the mug, chairs being moved, and so on. My cousin and I then slowly tiptoed to the kitchen to surprise my granny, but the joke was on us because there was no one there, and everything was in its place. Kettle ice cold, and grandma and grandpa fast asleep. We went back to our room, obviously freaked out, and tried to distract ourselves by coloring in some coloring books. We didn't want to go to sleep and decided to pull an all-nighter. The house was quiet until about 3 a.m. We heard the taps in the bathroom opening. I popped my head out of our room and saw that the lights were off and there is nobody there. I convinced my cousin to investigate with me. We checked everything out, and just as we wanted to go back to our room, the toilet flushed and I saw the silhouette of a girl in the reflection of the mirror, right behind me. Needless to say, we cuddled up next to each other with every light on we could possibly find. The next day we found out there was a girl who offed herself with a piece of broken mirror. Things were quiet for a while with the paranormal shenanigans, but it was simply the calm before the storm. My grandparents never had the best relationship and fought regularly, but we kind of grew used to it. After my cousin went home, their fights grew worse and worse by the day. One night, I was in bed when I heard one hell of a commotion. My grandmother came stumbling out of her room trying to hold her neck together, blood gushing and dripping everywhere. My grandfather cut her throat with a bread knife and tried to off himself by slitting his wrists. My mind blocked out what happened next. My next memory was when we visited my gran in hospital. My grandfather only a few rooms away in recovery. His only explanation for his actions were that he was taken over by something, and he had no control over his hands and his body. our family moved all their stuff that same weekend. We found out there was a group of individuals who were doing rituals trying to summon something on the property next to my grandparents' house. I guess they were successful.